as if Canada is about to change forever. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even parts of British Columbia just dropped an earth-shattering Wexit announcement. This isn't a drill.
If we separate as an individual province or become part of the 51st state, either or. But I think we need to stand up, because if we don't stand up, we're just going to be bowled over.
If we did become Americans, maybe we might be better off.
The Saskatchewan Prosperity Project is following in the footsteps of the Alberta Prosperity Project.
Western provinces just officially announced to go full nuclear on 51st to 56th statehood. Western Canada just crossed a line that permanently changes the country as the 51st to 56th state idea shifts from shock talk into real political motion. Alberta's referendum process has turned separation into an active legal pathway, pulling Saskatchewan, parts of British Columbia, and others into a shared direction that Ottawa no longer controls. Canada now faces a future where provinces gain leverage, market access, and strategic alignment by moving south, while the Federation absorbs capital flight, fiscal strain, and a breakup momentum that only accelerates from here.
I've lived in Canada and Alberta my whole life, right? And is it like I have not seen any improvement?
For some, joining the U.S. is about affordability.
There's too many taxes here.
Main part frustration in Western Canada has been building for years, but something critical just changed because that frustration crossed out of complaint mode and into action mode. People who felt ignored, overtaxed, and boxed in by decisions made far away stopped waiting for reform and started looking for exits that actually moved power. When frustration reaches this level, it no longer vents through speeches or social media. It demands a mechanism that forces consequences.
177,732 signatures are needed by May 2nd to put the question, do you agree Alberta should cease to be a part of Canada to become an independent state, to a referendum?
That mechanism is now live. Elections, Alberta approved a citizen initiative petition in December, placing Alberta's independence question inside election law and locking it to a deadline of May 2nd with a required threshold just under 178,000 verified signatures. Once timelines and rules appear, governments, investors, and institutions treat the issue as a real risk rather than a theoretical argument.
Something astonishing is happening in the Canadian province of Alberta. Take a look at these lines. Over the weekend, tens of thousands came out to brave the cold for one purpose: to sign a petition to officially secede from Canada.
What makes this stage dangerous is the speed at which organization replaces emotion. Signature drives produce databases. Databases turn into volunteer networks, and those networks evolve into turnout systems long before any vote takes place. Town halls across Alberta now focus on logistics, legal wording, and process durability, which signals a movement built to survive scrutiny rather than fade.
Stay Free Alberta is the group leading the signature phase, independent from the group who submitted the petition. People we spoke to largely had one word on the mind: change.
Capital prices probability. Once exit language hits election law, spreads widen and timelines reset. Power shifts away from political messaging toward procedure, because calendars and statutes enforce momentum on their own. And once a lawful exit path opens, reversal becomes increasingly difficult.
Premier Danielle Smith and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe both made it absolutely clear that their two provinces, which have a combined population of nearly 6 million and who control 75% of Canada's oil production, are absolutely united in standing up for their own citizens.
Energy sits at the center of this conflict because it funds the West and stabilizes the Federation. Alberta and Saskatchewan depend on oil and gas revenue to finance public services, which turns federal energy policy into an economic pressure point rather than a political disagreement. When project approvals stretch into years and development slows, capital responds by relocating, and that response removes jobs, tax revenue, and long-term growth from the provinces carrying the risk.
Alberta, year after year, has $20 to $25 billion that is siphoned out of our system to go to Ottawa so that it can be spent mostly in Quebec, but also in other places that vote Liberal. We have been watching this.
The fiscal imbalance intensifies the reaction. Alberta transfers more than $20 billion annually in net fiscal flows to Ottawa, accumulating roughly $600 billion since the 1970s by provincial estimates. Those funds support national programs while the producing province absorbs commodity volatility and regulatory drag. Over time, this dynamic changes incentives because regions generating revenue begin to question oversight from constituencies that neither depend on the industry nor absorb the downside. Ottawa's been running a $20 billion a year allowance from Alberta for decades. Turns out the kid with the job is starting to wonder why he's funding everyone else's summer vacation.
You know, I just don't like what's going on in the communities. I don't like what's happening, the crazy taxes, the homelessness, the drugs. Like, there's just we need to wake up a bit.
Western Energy already sells south, prices south, and integrates directly into U.S. supply chains and refineries. Washington purchases the output while Ottawa sets the constraints, creating a misalignment that turns loyalty into calculation. When production, exports, and markets point in one direction, political alignment eventually follows.
But at the end of the day, not only is the United States of America our largest trading partner, North and South, they're our most trusted and important ally.
This escalated the moment the same legal posture appeared across multiple Western provinces. Saskatchewan aligns naturally because its economy rests on energy, agriculture, uranium, and export routes already oriented south. Support for separation there has risen to roughly 40 to 45% in recent years, a level that forces political leaders to treat the issue as structural rather than rhetorical. At that range, separation becomes a variable in governance, rather than a fringe idea.
The goal is to continue with the relationship with the United States, because quite honestly, that oil is coming to U.S. refineries and it's creating jobs in places like Ohio, Iowa, Illinois, down into Louisiana and Texas. So the trade relationship is strong.
Saskatchewan's method explains the pressure on Ottawa. The province mirrors Alberta's sovereignty approach through legislation that reasserts control over land, water, and resources. This is administrative positioning, not protest. When Premier Scott Moe stated that a clear vote to leave would be respected, the impact came from its normal tone. Legitimacy entered the conversation quietly, and once legitimacy appears, containment weakens. When a premier casually mentions respecting a separation vote like he's discussing highway maintenance, the conversation already moved past if.
But Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even British Columbia have formally coordinated their separation strategy.
British Columbia adds weight through economic function rather than ideology. Coastal politics focus on branding, while the interior and north focus on fuel costs, employment, and market access. Those regions handle mining, logging, transport, and energy flow, and polling shows a significant share open to leaving Canada entirely. Economic operators matter here because they run the systems that keep trade moving. Manitoba locks the structure together. About 70% of Manitoba's exports go to the United States, and the province controls power grids and transportation corridors linking the West to U.S. markets. Control of choke points creates leverage without noise. Trade, electricity, and logistics already operate on north-south logic, and political alignment tends to follow infrastructure.
As you can see behind me, there are hundreds of people lined up to sign a petition. What's the question? Should Alberta separate from the rest of Canada?
You can see the line. Like, the lines are there everywhere. For every event, doesn't matter, small town, big city, medium city, the lines are there.
At this stage, the West functions as an integrated economic zone, rediscovering its bargaining power. Statutes, courts, and supply chains already align closely enough to apply pressure without coordination announcements. Ottawa continues to frame this as regional dissatisfaction, while provincial actions reflect an understanding that leverage already exists. The legal system accelerated this process the moment judges began treating separation questions as procedural matters rather than political theater. Court review signals legitimacy because it tests wording, thresholds, and compliance, which immediately elevates the issue from rhetoric to enforceable process.
We're not your enemy. We've actually done a lot for you guys, so now we're just going to do it alone. We could actually prosper for the first time in years without having to run through Ottawa's red tape, which we're sick of.
Canada's own Supreme Court framework on secession set the rules years ago by establishing that a clear question backed by a clear democratic result creates an obligation to negotiate. That precedent applies nationally, and provinces invoking it act fully within Canadian law while challenging its outcomes. This approach carries weight because it replaces confrontation with procedure, and procedure reshapes power dynamics faster than protest ever could. Canada built the legal exit ramp itself, then acted shocked when provinces found the keys.
Hope, prosperity for our children. for their futures, because right now in Canada it's a sinking ship, and if we don't take our little lifeboat and throw it out and get off all we can, we're going down with the ship. And we don't have to. We are giving away so much money to Ottawa. We're so controlled. We're losing our freedoms.
Western provinces already operate inside US-centric trade gravity. About 60% of Alberta's exports and roughly 70% of Manitoba's exports flow to the United States, anchoring energy, agriculture, electricity, and logistics to American buyers and utilities. When supply chains, contracts, and delivery schedules point south, counterparties plan around reliability and access. Procedural seriousness lowers uncertainty for them and raises leverage for the producer.
Alberta sent nearly $250 billion more to Ottawa than it received back in federal spending. $250 billion more than they received back.
Canada starts paying the price the moment a serious exit process goes live, long before anyone votes. Alberta alone sends more than $20 billion every single year into federal coffers. Money Ottawa relies on to fund programs, balance budgets, and keep the system running. The second that cash flow looks uncertain, the math breaks. Budgets wobble, forecasts lose credibility, and borrowing suddenly gets more expensive.
Taxes, employment, and housing.
We have to work even harder because we're too busy paying all of our taxes out east, and we get nothing back in return. And the people here have to work extremely hard to pay their rent, to pay their gas bills, to buy their food, and I think enough is enough.
Investors do not wait for speeches or unity slogans. The moment uncertainty appears, capital demands a higher return or leaves altogether. Energy projects stall, mining expansions pause, and infrastructure plans quietly get shelved. Even a small risk premium pushes money south, where timelines are shorter and rules feel clearer. That drag compounds quickly because fewer projects mean fewer jobs, lower tax revenue, and slower growth. Trade pressure makes it worse. About 75% of Canada's exports depend on the US market, which means any disruption in Western supply chains ripples straight through the national economy. Currency markets notice first, confidence slips, the dollar weakens, and import costs rise. None of this waits for a referendum result. It happens as soon as the process looks real.
The federal government doesn't seem to be interested in working with Alberta. And it's unfortunate, but you know what? We have a choice to make, whether we continue the status quo or we can make a change.
Unity speeches don't stabilize currencies. Math does. And right now, Canada's math is held together with Alberta's credit card. Globally, the damage spreads quietly. Allies and investors do not care about emotional appeals to unity. They care about stability, supply security, and follow-through. Energy, electricity, critical minerals, and Arctic access sit at the center of global planning. When Canada shows uncertainty around its own revenue anchors, partners hedge their bets. Authority stays centralized on paper, but leverage leaks out through contracts, capital, and long-term planning, and once that starts, the pressure only builds.
Representative appointed by President Trump to explore the benefits of either Alberta becoming an independent sovereign nation with economic union to the United States, becoming a U.S. territory, or pursuing full statehood.
The US option attracts provinces because the advantages are clear and measurable. The American market offers 330 million consumers, deeper capital pools, and faster approval timelines, which matters to regions built on energy, agriculture, minerals, and manufacturing. Scale reduces friction, and friction decides where investment goes.
And if it doesn't,
maybe I'll leave Canada. I'm not like...
Oh, you're considering it?
Considering it, yeah.
The income gap reinforces the pull. US GDP per capita runs roughly 25 to 30% higher than Canada's, and wages in comparable industries frequently exceed Canadian levels by tens of thousands of dollars. State tax structures stay flatter, housing costs outside major coastal cities remain lower, and capital circulates faster because regulatory timelines carry more predictability. Provinces already watching skilled workers leave see alignment as retention rather than ideology. Infrastructure and security add weight. U.S. states plug directly into federal defense spending, infrastructure programs, and disaster funding without intermediary negotiation. Energy producers gain guaranteed access to the largest consumer market in the world. Agricultural exporters operate inside the same system that buys their output. Power producers integrate directly with U.S. grids.
Funding, a lot of this, a lot of that. I think we need to be more like them.
You know, I just don't like what's going on in the communities. I don't like what's happening, the crazy taxes, the homelessness, the drugs. Like, there's just we need to wake up a bit.
To get our own country going. That's what we need. We need to be separated from the East. There's no more control.
When daily economic life operates inside one system and political authority sits in another, pressure builds to close that gap. At that stage, alignment feels administrative rather than dramatic, and momentum accelerates on its own. Rising living costs change the tone of this debate because survival pressure reshapes priorities fast. Housing prices surged, grocery bills climbed ahead of wages, fuel stayed expensive, and taxes increased while public services showed little improvement. For many households, the conversation moved from national identity to basic affordability. And once that shift happens, emotional attachment loses force.
The highest support for secession is actually among Alberta's youngest voters. Among Albertans aged 18 to 34, support for independence hit 40%.
Younger adults pushed this into a structural problem. Roughly 31% of Albertans now support independence, with the 18 to 34 age group showing the strongest backing. This matters because younger voters represent continuity and momentum rather than a temporary protest. They compare stagnant wages and unreachable housing at home with higher pay and lower entry costs elsewhere, then treat alignment as an economic decision instead of a cultural one.
Young people who've watched federal climate policies destroy energy jobs, equalization payments, those are basically subsidies to the other provinces, drain $4.2 billion per year out of their province, all the while they get nothing back.
Hard to sell national pride to a generation that can't afford the nation. This dynamic spreads quietly. Younger workers prioritize mobility, opportunity, and return on effort, and they relocate or disengage when those conditions fail. As that mindset grows, the system loses its future-facing support base. Countries absorb anger for long periods, yet they struggle once the next generation stops planning its life inside the existing structure.
If we were an independent nation, versus just being part of Canada, and I was looking at the benefits of both, and on the Canada side, staying in Canada, there just isn't any, even with the autonomy. If you're going to have so much autonomy, why not just be on your own anyways?
Ottawa still misses the point. This is no longer about whether the West wants to leave. It is about whether Canada can afford to keep them. The petition is active, the legal path is open, and the economic math already points south. Because once exit becomes process instead of protest, speeches lose effect and only costly concessions remain. Breakups like this do not begin with a vote. They begin when leaving becomes cheaper than staying. Like, share, and subscribe. The clock is already running.